Rishi Sunak is talking complete and utter rubbish.
No, I was furious. I was
absolutely furious. Tactical voting is the coward's way out. They don't understand that the environment, climate change, is part of the economy. And it has
let me kick off with a question about climate change. So far this summer, we've seen wildfires in British Columbia, New York covered in a blanket of yellow smoke, the Greek island of Rhodes being evacuated, California being flooded, large swathes of the Arctic melt. Polling suggests that the public are concerned about this, but the question remains, what are the politicians going to do about it?
Well, that's a very, very difficult question, simply because it's impossible to know what, for me as a Green, impossible to know what the other political parties think. Essentially, their concern is always the economy. They don't understand that the environment, climate change, is part of the economy and it has to be dealt with at the same time. And again and again, I stand in the House of Lords and I talk about climate change, climate crisis, all these disasters which you've just mentioned, and of course there are droughts as well, heat waves, and this is all within the so-called 1.2 centigrade safe limit. And so what on earth is going to happen, because we are predicted to actually go beyond that limit again, up to well over 2 degrees centigrade increase. So if this is safe, what's going to happen next? And I'm tired of standing up in the House of Lords and people just not getting that we are in a crisis. It's all started to happen very fast, and I think the public are very concerned. But politicians, it's their job to make it easy for the public to do the right thing, and to do the right thing is the first and absolute priority is to stop using fossil fuels. And that means no increase in oil exploration, no Rosebank oil field license and so on. And the other political parties just don't get it. It's really very difficult.
Yeah, you mentioned the fact that obviously Rishi Sunak has just green-lighted hundreds of new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea. He says that's in keeping with the government's net zero pledges, but how is that possible?
No, it's not possible. And also net zero is not what we should be going for, I'm afraid. What we should be going for is real zero. Net zero allows sort of, a bit more here if we can get a bit less here. And we shouldn't be doing that. We should actually be keeping below zero. We're at a crucial stage now. And things, as I said, things can only get worse. And so basically, Rishi Sunak is talking complete and utter rubbish.
Yeah, so in London, we were quite concerned with the Uxbridge and South Ruislip by-election, which was dubbed a ULEZ referendum by the local Conservative candidate. It seemed as a result, even though they won the seat by only a small margin, it seemed as a result to mark a bit of a step change for both political parties in terms of how they approached climate policies and how they campaigned around them. Should that be of concern to the public?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Labour is absolutely terrified of offending anybody at the moment because they're so desperate to win in the general election. But quite honestly, I think if they showed a little bit more courage, a bit more mettle, a bit more leadership, they might actually pull more people along. I despair of the Labour Party at the moment, and I work with it where I can. The Greens, we're mostly in the minority in any administration or any organisation, and so we have to work with other political parties. I even work with Conservatives at times, but it's getting increasingly difficult to work with Labour because of their pusillanimous attitude to climate change. And as for the Tories, they absolutely do not get it at all. And the whole thing about Uxbridge was that, of course, it's a dyed-in-the-wool Tory area. It was going to be very difficult for Labour to win there. And the whole ULEZ thing has been one of those siren calls to the right wing to beat the London Mayor Sadiq Khan over the head with. And I think it's been absolutely badly organised but badly thought through by Labour. And they should have supported Sadiq Khan and actually made it clear that we have to clean up our air. This isn't just about stopping drivers. This is actually about helping people who are suffering all sorts of lung disease and heart disease. And of course, taking pressure off the NHS. When we pollute the air like this, we're actually creating problems for the next 50, 60, 70 years, because there are children whose lungs are being stunted by air pollution, and they are going to rely on an awful lot of medical help in the future. So ULEZ has been one of these cultural sort of flags that the Tories have chosen to wave, but it's an absolute nonsense. And I just wish Labour was braver.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. There was a fascinating front page splash on the London Evening Standard last night, which painted Sadiq Khan to be deeply unpopular amongst Londoners. But when you actually read the polling, what it said was that in the areas where ULEZ is about to be introduced, his net favourability is down. But in the areas where ULEZ has been a thing for many years now, he's incredibly popular. So what does that tell us?
Well, it tells us the Evening Standard hasn't really got the intelligence to understand what's happening here. And as I said, if ULEZ were explained a little bit better, perhaps the editor of the Evening Standard could come along to some sort of meeting, then I think they would understand that it's an incredibly important move. It's not only about London, of course. London is one of the biggest polluters because there's so many people here, but this is something that should be rolled out nationwide. We, I'm afraid, have got to stop using fossil fuels. There's no way around it. And it's all very well to say, well, we can all go electric, but that actually isn't a solution, because a lot of electricity is produced using fossil fuels. And so we have to understand that we have to improve public transport, explain clearly to people that fossil fuels are not just bad the planet, they're actually bad for people as well, and make it easy for people to do the right thing.
I had an interesting experience in Leuven in Belgium. It's just outside Brussels. I'm not sure how well you know it, but they've got some incredibly interesting environmental policies. They're an incredibly progressive city. What was an interesting bit there is that they massively reduced how many cars were allowed into the city. And at the time when the moves came in, they were deeply unpopular. People couldn't believe that they were shutting down inner city car parks, and people couldn't believe that they couldn't drive freely around the city. Now, many years later, they're really popular. And one of the key reasons, and you've just touched on it then, is it's almost like they had a bit of a push and pull operation going on. On the one hand, you would restrict how easily it was for people to drive. But on the other hand, they made it incredibly easy for people to use public transport. They made it very easy for people to cycle, and they made it really enjoyable for people to just walk. And it's proved to be really successful. So I don't know whether the lesson is that if you make the brave decisions initially, in the end, you will reap the rewards.
No, that's absolutely true. And I mean, I'm still a big fan of Ken Livingstone. I know he's out of favour these days, but he actually, when he brought in the congestion charge, was clear that you had to use a combination of carrot and stick. And the stick was the congestion charge, a payment to bring your car into town. And the carrot was he massively improved buses and public transport within London. And that was extremely popular. I can remember being on a bus and seeing someone in a city suit. What I felt was the first time ever. So more and more people use buses. You're absolutely right. You can't just stop people using their cars. You have to give them alternatives. And of course, one of the other alternatives is, not that there's only ever one alternative, but one of the other possibilities is the 15-minute city, of course. And people have got into a terrible stew about this. But what it means is that you can have virtually everything you need within a 15-minute walk radius of where you live, which is fantastic. And when we say everything you need, we're not talking about a Parisian museum on every high street. We're talking about, the usual stuff, which does include, of course, police stations and shops of all kinds, and council offices perhaps. So there are lots of things people can do that, as you suggest, it takes bravery. And Sadiq Khan, in pushing out the ULEZ, I think is being brave, but he's also being very commonsensical and very practical.
We had it put to us that Rishi Sunak could perhaps be a worse prime minister than Boris Johnson recently. And I think what the argument was that was being put forward was that the environment seems to be a really low down on his list of priorities for him. I think a lot of people are sort of wondering, how many more prime ministers can we afford to have that don't take the environment seriously?
I cannot understand. No, you're absolutely right. And we can't afford not to take it seriously. And it's almost, I'm an optimist generally. And what I'm hoping is this government, if it still refuses to call a general election, which is what it should do from a democratic point of view, when it's so obvious that they're out of favour now. I think perhaps their attitude to the environment, which is appallingly negative and stupid, will perhaps encourage the population, the voters, to care more about it. I want to see more Greens elected at the next election. And part of this is that we need a Green in the room all the time to keep talking about climate change and how the environment interacts with the economy. You cannot have a healthy economy if you're not actually doing things for climate change, because, as I said at the very beginning, it's all moving so fast now. So I don't know how many more appalling appalling prime ministers we can have from the Conservative Party. I'm hoping they actually see sense and call a general election.
Yeah, even outside the climate change issue, which is important to increasing amounts of people, at the start of the year, Rishi Sunak outlined 5 pledges that were supposed to act as the hallmarks of his administration. How would you say he's faring so far?
I'd say he's doing very, very badly. I mean, this whole thing about integrity, we are not seeing integrity from this administration. He is, I think, generally considered a very weak prime minister, because, and so is Liz Truss in a way, but also Boris Johnson. They are very much beholden to the right wing of their party, and I would say that these people are hard right. And once you start accommodating those sorts of views, it puts you on a very, very weak footing. And I'm afraid that's what's happened here. If we had a Tory prime minister who could stand up to their right wing and say, well, we're going to do something on climate change, I think they might actually do better at the next election, which I don't want at all, obviously.
I mean, there's talks of a reshuffle in September. The last time we had similar moves in February, Lee Anderson was promoted to deputy chair of the Conservative Party. So is there any hope of Rishi Sunak trying to move away from the right wing and get rid of people like Lee Anderson and actually, try and get more centrists in his cabinet?
I think he's got a big problem. I mean, what I've seen in the House of Lords is that the old-fashioned Tories, and I suppose you might call them centrists, the old-fashioned Tories have moved away from this government. They are deeply unhappy with what's going on. And one of the features is that the opposition in the House of Lords, when I say opposition, I mean Labour, Lib Dems, Greens, and crossbenchers, we have been winning votes that you might not expect us to win, simply because a lot of what I would say, the good old Tories are staying away. They cannot bear to vote for some of the things that this government is trying to push through. So I think the Tory party is running out of good people. And so a reshuffle, well, that will be interesting, won't it? I don't think he's going to get many centrists in his cabinet.
Unfortunately not. Obviously, there was a big talking point recently in regards to your moves on the illegal migration bill in the House of Lords. Were you disappointed that Labour sort of snubbed it and didn't, and now we're sort of pressing ahead with that bill?
No, true. as I say, Labour is being so weak at the moment because they don't want to make any big decisions and so on, and they're not even committing to repealing some of these appalling laws that we've passed. Some of the laws that we've passed unwillingly, I would say, from a House of Lords point of view, actually contain Henry VIII powers. And this is a very, very crucial point. When you're talking about a democracy, you really don't want lots of Henry VIII powers in legislation. Those Henry VIII powers bypass scrutiny. They bypass any sort of parliamentary oversight. They actually say that ministers and others can just make up things and decide for themselves on certain issues. And before, what we've done is they've come through in secondary legislation, which is a sort of way of getting things through quickly when they're minor. But secondary legislation is not meant to be big issues. But this Tory government has pushed through what is essentially big issues without oversight. So I was furious at Labour. Furious. I mean, in a way, even more furious than the government than I was against the government, because the government, I expected it, but I sort of hoped better from Labour.
So you rightly point out that they're obviously really scared of saying anything really at the moment, and that is in a way because of what happened in 2019, and because they don't want to maybe lose the red wall voters. But you've equally got a bit of a challenge on your hand where they could jeopardise, the vote of people like me who are desperate for a party that can come into government and speak vocally about issues like climate change and the abhorrent nature of things like the immigration bill, but they're not doing that. So are they sort of playing a bit of a risky game here?
I think it's very, very risky because, as you say, they're losing a lot of people who aren't necessarily left wingers, but they're on the left, the left side of politics, if you like. And Jack, I think your only option is to vote Green at the next election. It's what I'm telling everybody. I'm reading a lot at the moment about tactical voting, but tactical voting is the coward's way out. And what you should really do is vote for what you want. And a Green vote is never wasted because people, it's a positive indicator of what you want. And if we have a massive vote, then hopefully in the next government we'll understand that and perhaps move towards a more climate-friendly set of policies. So vote Green, Jack.
No, well, cards on the table. Certainly at the last London mayoral elections, I voted Green. That could be interesting again when we come to that next time round.
I don't think there's any doubt that Sadiq Khan will win as London mayor. I'm hoping that we do very well as well. We've got a candidate for mayor, but yeah, I think the Tories haven't got a hope in hell in London. After their displays, I'm sure you've followed it all, but they've actually set up an inquiry into how their candidate actually got selected and all that sort of thing, and that's not a good look, and also very undermining for the candidate.
Yeah, no, indeed. Just to focus on the House of Lords quickly. Obviously, there's been a lot of attention around it with Boris Johnson and I guess imminently Liz Truss resignation on us, and they've reignited the debate around peerages. Do you think that it's time for reform, or do you think that was more of a case of almost like we've just had two bad apples?
I think, well, first of all, the Green Party policy on this is that we should have an all-elected House of Lords, because this system of appointments by prime ministers is an abuse, and it really should not be happening. But there are so many flaws in the House of Lords that it's very, very difficult to know where to start. I guess by stopping hereditaries sitting in the House of Lords might be a good place if you're going to start making incremental changes. But what we really need is wholesale changes. Having said all that, it works bizarrely well, and it does allow a lot of different views to come in, especially when we've got a House of Commons that's got a majority, a government majority of, well, it used to be 80, I think it's down a few now. You actually need a House of Lords that is a little bit argumentative, and all controversial bills start in the House of Commons. I'm sure you know this, and they come to us, and our job is to go through them. Our job is to read them and comment on them and improve them, because a lot of the legislation that comes through is really badly, I mean, it's badly conceived, but it's also badly written. And it needs tidying up. Sometimes it contradicts itself, sometimes it breaks the law. So our job is to actually change it. And what has been happening is that we make these changes, we vote for amendments, and then it goes back to the Commons, and the Commons immediately strips out all the amendments and sends it back. Now, that's not a democratic way of proceeding, but unfortunately, that's what you get when you get this massive numbers, government numbers in the House of Commons. So in some ways, the House of Lords works really well because we do the job that we're designed for. But in others, it does need wholesale changes. But we need a second chamber. It should not be scrapped. It should be reformed.
Yeah, no, indeed. I guess you've raised an interesting point there. I think a lot of people saw the almost a juxtaposition in that they were outraged at some of the peerages that were being handed out, but at the same time, certainly amid the Brexit debate, they really did start to see the usefulness of the House of Lords in terms of, as you say, scrutinising the things that were being put forward by the government.
I know, it's been quite interesting because as the government's, reputation has gone down, the House of Lords' reputation has gone up, because anybody who comes in and listens to a debate is going to think, well, that's very grown up, that's very mature, that's very interesting. You don't get that if you have a debate in the House of Commons. I think, when I first got into House of Lords, I was, I thought, God, we've got to scrap the bishops, we've got to scrap the hereditaries, got to do this and that. And then, of course, over time, you realise that, for example, the bishops, I would still scrap them, but they always raise issues of poverty and deprivation, and they speak from first-hand knowledge because they're out there mixing with communities that are desperate and on the breadline. And then the hereditaries actually have to be voted in. Bizarrely, they are elected into the House of Lords, sometimes by a quite small electorate, but and so most hereditaries, when they get elected in, work extremely hard, and they do contribute from all sorts of ways. Some of them are big landowners and they contribute in that sense. Others have different interests. So, bizarrely, the House of Lords works, and its reputation has improved, I think.
I would agree. I want to pick up on a point I think you were making about Charlotte Owen, who obviously garnered a considerable amount of attention due to sort of her vague political profile. But should her age have been a controversial aspect of her appointment into the House of Lords?
I think it is illogical to appoint very young people there, simply because what we're mostly looking for is expertise. And so somebody who's had 40 years teaching, 40 years in the medical world, or whatever, or 40 years in politics, where we understand how you can get things done and how legislation works and that sort of thing. These are useful aspects. On the other hand, I do feel her age and her looks were it garnered some very, very unfair criticism. And somebody made the point that one of the things she's very good at is getting people to work together. Now, if that's true, she's sitting on the Conservative benches. If she could get the Conservatives to work with some of the rest of us, I think then she'd be a good appointment. My view is she's in. I hope she takes it seriously. So far, she appears to. She's been turning up. And I hope that she can make a contribution. It's no good complaining about somebody once they're in. It's very difficult to get people out.
Yeah, indeed. Just a quick couple of questions on the media environment, because I think that the media environment's really interesting at the moment. And I don't know if you have any observations about what it looks like in relation to politics, and whether you think that Fleet Street still has the sort of same influence that it has over politics, or whether that's waning somewhat with social media?
I think probably, yes, it's waning somewhat. There's also the fact that we have fewer media outlets that are truly independent. You know, they're mostly controlled either by right-wingers or by people who live outside Britain. And so I feel that the British press at the moment, except for a few notable exceptions, I think that they are not doing the job that they should be doing. They should be informing the public, they should be challenging the status quo, and they should be actually keeping up to date with what's happening. It's taken ages for them to understand what's happening with climate change. I don't see much criticism, or not enough criticism, of this government, for example, and I think they're certainly not educating the public properly. So social media has slightly taken over. I mean, I personally, I listen to the news in the morning, but after that I hardly listen to the news, whereas once I would have tuned in various points during the day, but I'm on Twitter, you know, much more often than that.
Yeah. There's several political commentators, such as Carol Vorderman, obviously known for her previous media work, but also Marina Purkis, Peter Stefanovic, who've all sort of burst onto the scene recently, and they seem to be making a real difference. And at times they seem to be doing the job that you would traditionally associate with the mainstream media, such as, namely, holding power to account.
Absolutely, and I'm a huge fan of Carol Vorderman, Peter Stefanovic, and Marina Purkis and Gemma Forte and so on. I think they're doing the most incredible job, and in the same way, people like Chris Packham have actually changed the dialogue and make people question what's happening and inform them, of course. No, I'm a big fan of all of them. I think they are challenging the status quo, which is something we desperately need.
I think just to wrap up, there's always a tendency from me sometimes to be a bit sort of doom and gloom about the political environment, but I guess that the general feeling is that there might be change on the horizon. There are certainly people driving that and doing it really well, as we've just explained. So I guess there are some reasons to be cheerful.
It's hard, isn't it? It's really hard. I think, as I said before, I think the Tories staying in power, so-called, is having an impact on the rest of us, and perhaps is galvanizing public views in a way that it wouldn't otherwise. And I don't understand the thinking of the Tory party that's actually keeping going when actually they'd be a lot better off calling a general election and taking a pause, taking a breather, accepting that they're going to be you know, far fewer in numbers over the next few years. I'm not sure if it's well, I don't feel optimistic about the people who are coming through the political system at the moment, because I think politics has got such a bad, it's always had a bad name, politics, always, but it's so in the mud at the moment. I just wonder, you know, what talented people want to come in.
Yeah, I think Alistair Campbell has sort of been talking about that with his book, sort of like, and certainly trying to speak to people who feel like they could make a difference, but for whatever reason haven't sort of made the moves in that. And I think that is quite a big point, really, isn't it? That we do need those people, and if you think that you can make a difference, you should be doing what you can to do so.
Well, you know, we certainly have a lot of talented people in the Green Party who are just desperate to govern the country. So you know, give us a go at the you know, give us the chancellorship. We'd do really well at that.
I would agree. Yeah, it's great. Jenny, thanks so much for your time.